In this episode of the Exploring from Risk Secure podcast, what is physical security?
Computers now have primary control of critical functions.
Houston, recommend vector transfer.
Your go for APU shutdown on time.
Roger, go for deploy.
Nice to be in orbit.
Welcome to the Exploring from Risk Security podcast, where you will learn, explore, and grow your security mindset. I am your host, Timothy D. Block, and in this episode, we will be exploring physical security. With me to do that is Josh Winter, a former Army soldier in the 82nd Airborne. He's currently shifted into the cybersecurity space, and he and I work together at our current place of employment. He's really good at what he does. After getting out of the Army, he got into some personal security for high-profile clients. He has since shifted into the cybersecurity space, but still does a lot of physical security. If you're on a security team, often the physical security aspects can fall to the security team. I know I actually had some of that responsibility at a previous employer where physical security kind of fell into my lap because, hey, well, you guys control the badge system. Josh has handled that because he has experience with it, and talks about that from a corporate aspect. And he's really got that mindset again, from the military training and then from his previous career, kind of protecting high profile individuals, which you'll hear us kind of talk about a little bit. There's quite a bit of things you need to consider with that kind of stuff. Not only from a safety standpoint, we've heard about some of the shootings going on of executives, but also someone just coming into the building and being able to plug something in, which might not happen for everybody, but in certain industries, that's certainly something within your threat model. So. Show notes can be found at exploresec.com/EIS. Feedback for the show, timothy.dblock@exploresec.com. You can hit me up on LinkedIn, rate the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. We have a Discord channel we've started. I've got a listserv as well, too. I need to go check that, as a matter of fact. With that, let's go ahead and get into it. But yeah, so physical security, right? So physical security is like a episode or, topic that can be relevant now. I mean, some of the technology and other stuff's going to change, but down the road, like the theory, a lot of the other stuff around it is the same. Because one of my more popular episodes, you know what Sammy Kamkar is? Mm-mm. He's the guy that created the MySpace worm back in the day. Okay. So he created a worm that kind of proliferated and got himself in trouble, got himself arrested. We should ask Victor if he knows him. But, got himself arrested, but got restricted from using a computer at one point, but then came back and was doing a lot of research on just different stuff. Like, I think at the time he was essentially, I don't know if you want to say breaking, hacking, whatever, but intercepting garage door opener signals. Okay. And he was able to with a cheap kit, recreate a tool that captured that, and that similar to what's out nowadays. What's that tool called? Flipper, right? Yeah. Similar to that, and then just resend it. So he was kind of showing that people can break into garage door. I don't think that's much of a thing. I feel like a lot of that's been fixed. The flippers, you can still walk around and do a bunch of stuff anyways, right? But sure. That's kind of started it. Yeah. But talking to him, he talked about how do you, the episode was how do you find vulnerabilities, right? And he went down into the theory of understanding the technology all the way down to the ones and zeros, right? Because at the end of the day, all of technology is electricity and ones and zeros. And if you understand that and dig that deep in, you're going to find vulnerabilities because you're going to go, this shouldn't work this way. Why is it? Or if I try this in a different way. So that's more theory. And that's why, again, the podcast and this episode is what's some of the more timeless thing about, what's that can apply to this, not only now, but down the road. I mean, obviously, again, things will change when we have to worry about jetpacks and other stuff.
True. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to start with a very basic question here. What is physical security?
Okay. I think physical security at its core is all of the things, the tools that keep your people safe, and they do that by keeping unauthorized people out of the places they shouldn't be. If I had to sum it up in a sentence.
How long have you been in physical security?
Let's see. So some of it goes back to the military, a little bit. I was combat infantry in 82nd, and so I spent a lot of time on the line. But then I got into their combatives program, and they have these 4 tiers or 4 schools that you can go to, and I went to all of them, and I ended up teaching combatives. I was the chief combatives trainer for the 82nd before I got out at Fort Bragg, and one more time in Afghanistan. And while I was in Afghanistan the second time, I got tasked with some what's called PSD work. So you're essentially doing security for some of the higher ups, so some of the command sergeant majors and their generals and stuff like that. And so I did a little bit there, but shortly after that I got out and to go to school. And when I was in school, I was doing my undergrad at UCSD in San Diego, and a friend of mine got a job doing estate security. And so it was just they're a wealthy family there in San Diego, and they weren't famous. They just had a ton of money, and so it posed a kidnapping risk. And so I worked at their estate for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And that was my first, I guess, pure physical security job, was that. And then, so I majored in something else completely different. And so when I graduated, I left. And then when I got back, so I was living and working in Tanzania, and got back to San Diego, and I had to do something for more money. I just wasn't making enough money to live in those cities. Like the company I was working for, their headquarters was in Seattle, and then I was living in San Diego. It's just cost of living is too high. And I had some friends that had gotten into executive protection. So same thing, military backgrounds. They were working for a company called Gavin DeBecker, and some of these guys, I mean, they stay with Gavin. Gavin DeBecker is a pretty notorious private security firm, and a lot of these guys, they'll get in with clients, these high net worth clients of, they're typically famous musicians, actors, actresses, stuff like that, and they'll form not relationships, but if you're this person and you get this bodyguard, for example, you want that person only. And so a lot of times you see happens, they cut the middleman out. And then the actor will hire that individual, and these people will branch out and start their own security firms and things like that. And so they were getting into that, and then through a referral, I ended up getting into that same situation. I was working for a high net worth, famous individual, and that's what I started doing. I did that for about 3 years, and I worked with several different clients and movie sets and households and musicians that were touring and stuff like that. So that was.
So yeah, I want to differentiate. It's like there's a bodyguard component, but it sounds like too you might have like a look at their house, look at the set that they're going to, thinking about just some of the different things that can happen. Exactly.
Yeah. So coming back to the physical security, you're absolutely looking at the house. You're doing what's called an advance. And that would be if you're going, it doesn't matter where you're going, to lunch or to a movie set or to wherever. If you have the manpower and you're dealing with a pretty solid squared away team that has their logistics down, you're looking at routes. You go to the site before they do, and you check everything out. And so you're doing elements of that. Yeah. And it just depends on the size of what's called the detail. If you're one person with one client, right, there's a lot of things you have to skip just by the nature of the beast. Like I can't go check out the physical location and also be with you. So, but if you've got, depending on some of these things, your physical security stuff, looking at buildings, looking at homes, assessing, essentially doing like risk analysis for all of these things.
Well, see, and I want to because traditionally, and I've tried to get these people on before, that these are people at pen test companies that are breaking into, buildings and all this stuff. And I don't know how much you read up on some of this stuff, but some guys just got paid like $600,000 because they broke into a government building. They were paid to go do that physical pen test.
Yeah.
But then they got arrested
Oh
and charged
yeah.
because but like I could see too where you're probably getting better experience because you're actually dealing with an actual potentially risky situation, especially if you're talking like high profile people that have stalkers, have potentially people that want to come after them for whatever reason, right? They're kind of huge targets. And so yours is actually, you're not just testing something, you're actually dealing with live, as you just said, risk.
Yeah, and each client is going to help determine what that risk profile looks like, because it could be, if it's an older actor that doesn't say anything politically charged or something, there's probably going to be a low threat thing. But then you could have a client who's very antagonistic and they have a lot of enemies and their following is typically a younger crowd. Like all these things play into building that risk profile of who and what it is. And then so you're going to those sites and you're looking at these things, you're factoring that in too. But with the physical pen testers, I mean, those guys that do that it's so fascinating. And I have never done that as an occupation. I've heard some of the stories on the Darknet Diaries.
Yeah.
They'll be on there, and
Yeah.
I love those. Those are great because, and that's what I think we're going to get into it today, but and to kind of talk about from just like a cybersecurity team, right? Your blue team, your red team. It's the exact same. I mean, there's those components, and then you have your purple team, and it's all of those things are still in play in the physical world we can see and touch. So yeah.
I mean, it's a different. It's your threat model is not my threat model, and like you're saying too, it's like you have different. You've kind of picked up on that too. It's like each company or person can have a different kind of profile that you need to be concerned with.
Yeah, and there's blanket stuff that doesn't change. I mean, you like in anything, I would do these three things no matter who I'm with, but you tailor it, right? That's the name of the game, especially in like the executive protection field. These are individuals who are used to dealing with bespoke in every facet of their life. So I need it this way at this time. So that adaptation, that flexibility is there, but so different than corporate physical security. And so when we're talking about physical security in a corporate office, you're talking about a stagnant or a stationary environment that doesn't change a whole lot. You can build your threat model, your risk analysis, and for the most part, it's not going to change a whole lot. Which is it's a lot less dynamic, but it's so easy to miss things, and it's so easy to cut corners. Because you're dealing with the anesthetic of familiarity. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of get lulled to sleep by that. Whereas, you're in a dynamic, ever-changing environment. It's easier to stay tapped in. It's easier to stay focused. Whereas, I would say the hard part of corporate security, or security at home for that matter too. If we talk about the differences between physical security, your house versus the office. It's easy to get lulled to sleep. It's easy to cut corners. People get lazy, right? Because the antithesis of security is convenience. I don't want to wear a seatbelt, but I do because it could save my life, right? But now I've got to go this extra step. I don't want to lock my car. I just want to be able to get into it, but I do because I don't want you to steal my 86 cents I have.
Yeah, they don't really steal radios anymore. Remember when you used to get those radios that you put in and could be easily removable?
Yeah.
Well, and I think the other thing is not just convenient for people at home. It's definitely convenience, but it's also for like corporates. It's budget too, and I guess people at home, it could be budget as well.
Yeah.
But also like I always look at too, like where's the area I'm at, right? If I live, in downtown, I don't live downtown versus live in the suburbs. It's a different profile, right? I might have more of like a ring camera up in downtown, whereas at home, I will say too, when I moved in, it was funny. One of the realtors said to me, "Is like, all the kids in my neighborhood know my code to get into my house." because their kids shared it with all their friends, just saying, come on over. So the first thing I did at my new house was I disconnected that battery. So it's like, you got to use a key. You got to use analog to get in, kid. They're coming in here.
Smart.
Yeah. But, it's the same thing I've always heard too, working at a couple different companies. It's like, we want a man trap. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But a man trap is super expensive to put in. Same thing with like security guards and other stuff. So you kind of feel like you have to balance that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely going to be a budget, right? Dictates a lot. But hopefully, like the people who, if you're lucky enough to be at a company that has a budget for things like cybersecurity, has a budget for some physical security, that's terrific. That's step one. Step two then is to not just spend the money blindly. You really do want to sit back and what is our threat here? Because if you get in that, if you get into that situation where you spend a ton of money and trying to solve a problem over here, and then somebody breaks in or does something nefarious that you didn't see coming, and it cost them $8 to do that, and you bought this $500,000 security system that didn't help at all, now you're going to be answering for that. So even if whether you have money or don't have money, it still comes back to a common sense approach or a risk analysis approach to, so you are spending whatever dollars you do or do not have as effectively as possible.
So what are some of the first things you're looking for when you walk into a place as far as building out physical security?
So nothing crazy, nothing, the red flags, they're not sophisticated. I'm looking for propped open doors. I'm looking for the culture. Are people allowing other people to tailgate in? Are they holding doors for people? I'm looking for unsecured, kind of forgotten about spaces, like loading zones that are left open, or side doors that are propped open or unlocked, or variances. And you can go to a place and the front it looks like Fort Knox, and then you walk around the side and it's like one door that's got a crash bar and maybe some glass, and you could easily jimmy it open, or a lot of times or like in factory spaces too, like you'll see if the ventilation is poor, people are propping windows and doors and spaces to get ventilation and airflow, and that opens up an otherwise possibly secure space. So I think you start with something like that, the common sense stuff, and you're looking at, like I said, the culture. I'm looking more for signs of complacency, I think, than anything Mission Impossible sophisticated.
Yeah.
To start.
So looking for some of the simple stuff.
Yeah. So, and some of those things, as I list those off, you can think in your mind how easy someone would be to change and how hard other ones would be to change. You can put out a memorandum to stop propping doors, but squashing tailgating's tough sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other beast right there, for example. So.
Yeah. I just take it in on your badge after lunch. You didn't say it.
Well, and we have to use common sense there. And it's like,
Well, that's what I like. I like it's common sense. If you know the person, right?
Sure.
Yeah. It's when someone you don't know is wandering around the building. That's when I want people to be questioning that person.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, if you want to get right into it, it's like if you're one of those, what we were talking about earlier, the physical pen testers, or you're an actual criminal, their whole thing is they don't have to sneak around; they have to blend in.
Yeah.
So how am I going to blend in? I'm going to act like everyone acts, right? And so it's not just the obvious. You got to be confident. It's like
grab a clipboard.
Yeah.
And a hat.
It's like have you ever seen that movie? Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah.
With Frank Abagnale.
Yeah.
It's like if you watch that movie, it's a Hollywoodized version of this, but the tenets stand. It's like, how did he become, in quotes, a doctor and a lawyer and an airline pilot? And you watch, it all started with an air of confidence. It started by not looking lost. And Frank Abagnale said this actually in and he's written books and stuff too. But like, people they look for, they're looking for they're not going to sit there and scan your badge, and see, is there a hologram on it? Because we have holograms on our badge here, They're not doing that. They're looking for attire. They're looking for, is that, the way you talk, the way you're handling yourself. Those things are, that person probably should be here, and they're going to be able to get through the door. They're going to be able to not only get through the door, but get into probably sensitive areas and all this other stuff. And there's more to it than that, but it starts with that. It starts with blending in and understanding, and you can do just a little bit of recon into, okay, I want to go into this building, go sit in the lobby for 3-4 days. If you're a serious criminal and you have time, what I'm saying, or you're a pen tester and this is my job to break into this building. That's what I would do. I would go sit in the lobby, I'd get a coffee, and I would sit there and I would watch. How are they dressed? What are they carrying? What do they look like? And then I would just start to mirror that, and eventually that would be step one, to gaining physical, access. So to counter that, I would say, the biggest, you have to get your people to understand that that's a thing, and to redirect that kindness. You know what I mean? It's like, especially here in Tennessee, it's like everybody has that southern, not everybody, but a lot of people have that southern hospitality. Yeah. And so it's like, it's not even, even if I was confrontational, and that's another thing, most people are not confrontational, they're friendly.
Yeah. But that's why I tell people is you can be friendly and still, hey, are you new? Or
exactly. Yeah. Instead of, let me open the door for you and watch you walk through.
Yeah.
Who are you here to see? Do they know you're coming?
Yep.
Who can I go get for you?
Yep.
Something like that. Oh, you've got a bunch of stuff in your hands. Here, let me hold it for you while you get your badge out and swipe in.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And so we have to just accept that those are facts. Most people are nice. Most people want to be helpful. Most people want to help. Most people are not confrontational. And then you have the bystander effect of, even if you're not friendly or confrontational, it's not my problem.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so you bring all those in as fact. We don't have to act like they don't exist, but we do have to redirect it. And that's where, cybersecurity awareness, physical security awareness comes into play. You create an awareness culture, and you're constantly, bringing up these feedback loops. So it slowly, braces, shifts the culture a little bit, because you're not going to do it overnight. You're not going to tell people to not be nice. Because they're going to do what they want to do when they think you're not looking.
Yeah.
Anyways, you have kids, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, that's why I have cameras everywhere, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I feel like cameras are kind of like your logging that you need to do, because you're going to want to potentially go back and see if something happened, and then sometimes even just the visibility of cameras can make people be a deterrent in itself, right?
Yeah. And so. That's cameras are an interesting beast, and I think it's important to frame them and understand them correctly, because it's like, a camera is different than a door, and that a door will physically stop me from doing something. The camera stops me from doing nothing. And it also, so if you're the bad guy, I can still do what I want to do and wear a mask and whatnot. The other thing is cameras give an air of security, a false sense of security, if I'm being honest. Like, people see cameras and they think this place is safe because there's cameras. Well, when you'll see in some facilities, those cameras may be broken. Those cameras may not have proper, storage. So they could be recording and then just looping back over themselves far too quickly, so that it doesn't offer any real value, or, I'm not going to name names, but I was in an MDF and they had a camera. As soon as you walk into the MDF is the main distribution frame in a building, so network closets, servers, things like that. You walk in and there's a camera pointed right at you. And I was in there one day, I followed it back, the cable coming off the camera is completely unplugged. It's not even plugged in. So not only, it's not even on, like red light blinking, it's not even there. It's just a turned off camera pointing at the door. So, and you have to, and that's a funny story, but if you're a company or you're an employer or something, and you have cameras and they don't work, something happens and they find out it doesn't work, that's a lawsuit, because you have created this sense of security, you have created this environment, and it turns out to be a complete facade. So you got to be careful with that stuff. If you're going to have cameras up, they need to be functioning, step one, and they need to be useful. I think that they have their place, but cameras are an after the fact tool. They're an archival tool, you know. So they'll help, but they're not going to. In my opinion, they won't stop or prevent anything.
Right.
So, especially if again, going back to a pen tester, somebody a real criminal, it's like, I know where the cameras are, what they can see, what they can't see. Going back to assessing a physical location, you have cameras in the wrong spots. You have cameras covering this hallway, but you don't have them covering the shell of the building itself.
Yeah.
Or you have these dead spaces where the cameras can't see. All of those things would be cased out by a professional criminal or a professional pen tester. So if I really wanted to evade them, I could, so, but yeah.
What do you think is the bigger threat to most organizations right now? I mean, we've had to deal with it in healthcare, right? An active shooter versus a criminal, getting in versus, I don't know what else would be, as far as like a threat to physical security.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a sad reality that the active shooter thing has become so prolific.
But is that more than like a cyber, or not a cyber criminal, but a criminal or any other, reason to break into a?
No, I hyper violent crimes, like a active shooter, somebody who was just indiscriminately coming on site to shoot people for what, and it wasn't a targeted, thing. I think it's hyper rare, statistically. Yeah, it's nationwide. You see it everywhere. But I think I think a real threat would be somebody trying to get on site to steal something, whether that be something physical like a computer or intellectual data. I'm getting on there with a thumb drive and I start plugging it into things, and now I can, especially if I can get into an MDF or an IDF and plug a thumb drive that's got malware on it onto it. I mean, that's easier than trying to hack into your system if I could physically get on site. So I think all of those things could, but it could also be something as simple as a disgruntled former employee. What I've seen personally is that it's either a disgruntled employee or somebody a customer who's upset with the organization. They come on site to voice those grievances to leadership, and they show up on your floors or show up at your building to talk to the CEO, whatever. And I heard a story about people coming up to protest. So they got into the lobby area and they were protesting the particular company. So those things, I think, but I would say those things are more realistic than, a crazy Sandy Hook situation. I think it's absolutely possible, unfortunately, but it's just as possible anywhere. I don't think, I do think an organization, what you do, what you sell could factor in. If you're selling, something like, you name it, you're selling Twinkies versus you're selling, pharmaceuticals versus whatever, something that doesn't have a popular opinion behind it. If you're an arms manufacturer and you have a different, there could be people that are against that. You do animal testing or something. You're a laboratory, and it's like all kinds of different things could come up. So.
Well, and I think too, I mean, you have, and that's why I asked more general, like overall, and kind of your experience kind of stuff. It's dealing with some of those, I don't know, I guess disgruntled folks. Like I've had a scenario where I wasn't even the physical security guy, but they're like, hey, we just let this person go. He's just sitting in his car. can you monitor this? And I'm sitting there looking out windows.
Yeah.
It's like, if he pulls a gun or something, because that was the thought, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and nothing ever happened out of that, but it is it's just that kind of stuff. I guess also too, we should cover insider threat, right? You said gun manufacturing. I can imagine, and we deal with it in healthcare, right? Is people walking out with stuff, or people, if you're talking about a manufacturer company walking out with a gun, or stuff falling off the truck, right?
Sure, yeah.
Like, how do you account for that?
Yeah,
People that are already in the building, leaving with stuff.
Yeah, I mean, again, I see with that, you just, at the end of the day, you have to pay attention. Complacency. There is, God, I forgot, I was watching a series, and what my favorite one was it was called A Bourbon Heist, and it was about Buffalo Trace, and they had just that. They had an insider threat where this guy, it turned out to be multiple people. They didn't know each other. Just they were stealing bourbon from Buffalo Trace and the high end stuff too. And for years, and the proverbial barrel rolls off the truck story. Yeah. And nobody noticed, and so what happens, going again back to complacency, back to, oh, that's John. He's worked here for 3 years. I know him. I know his wife, and he has kids. He is no longer a threat. The passes you write for people because of just a little bit of trust.
Yeah.
So I keep going.
No, keep going. Sorry, I'm like, if you don't notice, I fidget with stuff constantly.
No, you're good. Yeah.
Just trying to make sure. Have you been recording for the last 20 minutes?
Start over.
I've done that before. Where 50 minutes in, I went,
shit. So I think there has to be, you have to remove the biases you create for people over time in a professional way, not in a, you have to profile people. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're in security, there's an element of that. Like, you have to objectively, but you have to check your own bias. You know what I mean? This is my buddy. This is my friend. My coworker for 5 years. I know blah, 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 blah. You don't know what's happening in their life.
Right.
You don't know if you have a gambling debt that's gone very bad and now they're late on their mortgage. And I'm going to steal from the company in order to make sure my family has food now because I've been making bad personal decisions you know nothing about. You don't know people's scenarios. So you have to have elements in play that would check the deviations in behavior that you and your own bias would ignore. Mm-hmm. It's like, think of all the passes you write for somebody you love or trust versus a stranger. The things that person can say and do to you, and you're like, that's just Jim being Jim. Versus if a stranger did it, you would clock it instantly. Yeah. Elements like that have to be in play in the corporate world or in any business environment because of that reason. Because as much as I know you, I don't know you. Yeah. You know what I mean? How easy it would be to live a secret life and have a secret life, or just elements of the life outside the office of that person and people you don't know. That's where I think insider threat mostly comes from, is that people make they create this fallacy in their mind that they know somebody. And at the end of the day, I mean, you could argue, do you really know anybody, to be honest?
Right.
So taking a look at that, if you're listening to this and you're like that, because I can tell you this, it's not going to be somebody you suspect. Mm-hmm. Because the people you suspect are they're gone typically. You're already looking for reasons to get them out the door. They don't ever have time to craft a multi-year sabotage, like the Bourbon Heist, for example. The Bourbon Heist worked so well because he was trusted, and he took in small amounts this trickle, He wasn't severing an artery, he was pricking a finger. But he did that over years, and now you've got yourself, a body's worth of blood. And so that's, it's the people you don't expect, and that's where an insider threat program, institutions have them, police forces have them, the military has them. You have internal networks that are within, but they're not of the same thing, so it's separate. So I can investigate people, and I don't have to tell you why. I don't, so I'm not beholden to that. So I have an actual shot of catching, somebody. But that's what I would say. I would say trust but verify, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's
similar.
It's a risk profile, right?
Sure, yeah.
Is what you're talking about, and kind of just what we kind of started with, which is threat modeling, is understanding what's important to you and how can someone abuse that.
Exactly. Yeah. And if I'm, I work for a service company. All right, what can I steal? If I don't have a widget to walk out the door with, I have so okay, well that threat doesn't really exist. Now I work for a bank. Well, now that changes. I do have something I could walk out of value with immediately. So you're asking yourself different things, or if I'm in, what do I have access to? What of the crown jewels or something do I have access to that I could exploit? We're IT, for example. What do you have? You have access to droves of information that could be valuable to,
But is that, and that leads into my final question here, is physical security a cybersecurity problem? Because I've been at multiple organizations where physical security falls under the cybersecurity team because there's security in the title.
Yeah, I absolutely would appropriately call them, sisters or whatever. I definitely think they're closer than cousins kind of thing. But I don't think they're the same thing. I think there's a ton of crossover. And I think physical security, the more you inject technology with it, it will be beholden to the laws of cybersecurity, in that the same way your refrigerator and your thermostat is. If you hook it up to a network, you have to stay abreast of vulnerabilities, of security threats, just like Microsoft does. Because you cannot sell me a hardened steeled, anti-drill reinforced plated lock, but I could turn it off with my phone. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So if you're going to, and more security companies are, and it's a good, I do think it's a good thing. I'm a technology person. I'm a cybersecurity person. So I think the infusion of technology will help create additional convenience in the physical security space, much needed convenience. And that's a great thing, but they absolutely have to adhere to frameworks. They have to adhere to standards and not deviate. And a deviation from that not only would harm their customers, but it eventually lead to lawsuits and a shutdown. So you've got to be very abreast of these things. If you're going to bring technology into physical security, if that lock on that door is touching the World Wide Web, you have to treat it as such. You have to care about cybersecurity. And if it's not, then no, then you are in your own department. So I think there's going to be elements of both. And if I was architecting a security solution, a physical security solution for a company, I would want to have elements of both. I would want to have things that were quote unquote air gapped away from the network, and I want to have things that were on there, right? Because with the injection of technology, not only you have convenience, but you also have telemetry. Who's coming, who's going. Getting back to what we're talking about, the insider threat. I have a way to help me get some data that I can then sort through and ultimately create a more secure environment. But that comes at a cost, especially if you're not paying attention.
Yep. All right. Any last thoughts or anything we didn't cover with physical security?
I think that, just getting away from that, that I'm supposed to be here confidence, if you see that, I think that's the biggest scam in the book. It's like, that does not mean that person is supposed to be where they're supposed to be. You have to, train yourself to get away from, if you're in charge of a physical security program, you teach, the employees you work with, that is step one for any pen tester or any bad guy. It's not to be sneaky. They're not going to be Mission Impossible dangling from a rope. They're going to be blending in. And so, kind of educating people on that, kind of thing. So I'd like to, that's what I hope to do, with, where I'm at now. That's what I try to do is, but physical security is like, it's like many things. Most people think it will never happen to them. So they don't plan for it. You know what I mean? And they don't, one of the questions we had talked, you shot over is, if you had, a little bit of money to, to harden your house, for example, I would not install some sophisticated, very expensive system. The first thing I would do is I would make sure the place looked clean, and I would make sure the lighting was good. I would make sure that, and if you could take it one step further, I'd make sure it was motion activated. So at night, you're walking around my house, lights come on, and it's bright, and you can see everything.
Yeah.
That goes so much further than a camera system, right? And I would upgrade the locks. I'm a hardware guy through and through. It's like there are $10 lockpicking kits on Amazon and a 5-minute YouTube video, and you can pick the locks in somebody's house. And so for a few bucks, you can go and get yourself a security lock. For a few bucks, you can get something to fortify the frame of your door at your house. And all of these things are well under $500. And they go a long way to actually protecting you. I think that's a big misnomer that a locked door is secure. It's not. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so understanding, the facade of security, I think that's the biggest thing. A sign doesn't stop anybody. A camera doesn't stop anybody.
Yeah.
A person sitting at a desk without any actual, locked doors or security is just, that's, if you're hoping somebody's too scared to awkwardly walk across a lobby because somebody's sitting at a desk somewhere, that's just hope. That's not security. You have to make sure you're asking yourself, where are you actually putting security?
All right, Josh, thank you for joining me to discuss physical security.
Thank you so much, Tim. I had a great time. Thanks for having me on.